Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond Trauma. I am excited to bring you a very special guest today, Yogini, who I have known for many, many years. She's just always been a bright light, kind of crossing paths. Recently joined the 3.5 Acres Yoga nonprofit board, which we are so grateful. She is just a beautiful spirit with so much to give. And I wanted to have her on, and I was very, very touched when she wanted to be on and to talk about a very important topic that many of us struggle with. So today we're going to be talking about self-compassion, and our guest is Shawna Emerick. Shawna is a yogini, a dancer, a Thai yoga bodywork therapist, a life coach, and a dreamer who loves to look out the window of a plane, a spiritual activist, an explorer, a lover, a woman, an Ohioan, a New Yorker, a daughter, a sister, a mother, a wallfly, a leader, a world traveler, a planner who likes to improv, contemplate, and a human being. Um, she is, to me, a healer and a helper. And Shawna guides yoga classes, facilitates workshops, hosts retreats, and does private clients. She has many, many certifications, has studied with some fantastic teachers, and is a fantastic teacher in her own right. And today, like I said, she's going to talk to us about self-compassion, what it is, why it's important to her, and how to very gently bring it into our lives. We offer a lot of to-dos, small actionable steps. And in fact, at the end, I'll say it up front, at the end of the podcast, Shawna asks you to let us know the one to do that that you're going to add into your life in the world of self-compassion. We talk about the roots of the word self-compassion, why it's so important, especially for givers and helpers, what to do if you're blocked with self compassion, different ways to offer that to yourself, what it has to do with others. Is it selfish to be compassionate? What to do if it doesn't feel right? I mean, we really cover a lot of ground here. And like I said, a lot of actionable steps. So I know you're going to love this episode, Shawna. I'm so grateful that you took this time and we got to be together. And here we go. Hi, Shawna.
Hi, Lara. How are you?
I'm good. I'm cold looking at you. I'm in like 50 layers here in
Yeah,
the Catskills.
yeah. And I'm in the New York City apartment that has all the heat, and I turned the radiators off because it's not, yeah, that's why I've got my tank top on.
I love it. I remember putting like the pots of water on my radiator back in the day.
Yep, totally.
So I'm really glad you could come on. Folks might not know you're one of our newer members to 3.5 Acres Yoga Board, and we've known
Yeah,
each other for a gazillion years.
a long time.
A long
Yeah.
time, and you've always just radiated to me yoga, what yoga is, and
Hmm.
it's about your
Thank
just
you so
really
much.
gentle
Yeah,
spirit. You're welcome.
I feel the same way about you. That's why I so answered the call for executive board because I've been following 3.5 Acres for so long and following you, and just love all that you've brought to this world, including this podcast. And it's an honor to be on here today for sure, because I am a listener, and I know
Yay!
all of the people that you've had on. I haven't listened to all of the episodes exactly, but a lot of them, most of them.
And when we were discussing, my wanting to have you on and what we should talk about, you brought up a topic that I've been wanting to cover on the show for a long time. I
Yeah.
think, knowing the show and knowing your strengths, you saw that this is an area we haven't covered and that is very important and delicate,
Mhm.
and that's self-compassion. So why
Mhm.
is self-compassion important to you and a particular area of study for you?
Yeah, well, I also love the recent episodes that kind of get at it a little, like the compassion fatigue episode and the doctor you had on, I forget his name off the top of my head, but um, and I'm thinking of him with some things we might get into around like differences between self-compassion and confidence and self-esteem and things like that. But the reason why I took deep dive into self-compassion is because I'd always roll my eyes at it, to be honest. I mean, I've been 20 years teaching yoga but I always, practice kindness towards yourself. And in the back of my head, my eyes would roll, or it just, I come from a background where it's more be of service. Be of service. That's how you get your happiness, is you just keep giving outward, outward, outward. And it wasn't until in the past 2 years, actually, and I give caveats to my peers in my mindfulness meditation teaching certificate program for really supporting me to accept and acknowledge that this is a topic that it's okay for me to dive into. And that's part of what my practicum then became is I also felt like, oh, everybody, it's what, Tara Brach calls as the trance of unworthiness anyway.
Mm.
Has many different variations, but I thought, oh, everybody's going to do this or that, and why me? And, I'm not so sure I want to do my practicum mindfulness as a path to self compassion, but that's the title it ended up being. Actually, and you can stop me from talking or going on, but
You said a lot of good stuff there, and I am curious about that balance of service and self-compassion. So I think what you alluded to is like in your internal monologue and belief system, they were kind of opposing ideas. You're either going to be a yogi who's like a karma yogi, right? Whose yoga is really for doing for others for service. Or you're going to be kind of focusing on yourself, what some would call navel gazing, and that focus on your own life, your own attainment of
yeah,
enlightenment, easing your life and gaining greater knowledge, but maybe not so much focus outward. Am I kind of
yeah.
getting that? Yeah.
Definitely. You're hitting a lot of different offshoots that we could move from in conversation. But the ones that are standing out is, yeah, I felt that, and this is one of the misconceptions around self compassion, is that we are selfish. Is that if I am not being of service or doing or acting or even being, productive, etc., that then I have become self-absorbed, which is another misconception. Think of, that um, narcissistic tendency, or people are going to think I'm egotistical. That's one of my personal biggest ones that I continually work on, actually, and that self-compassion actually supports me in taking a look at in gentle and kind ways, but also in very acknowledging ways, or what I might call more fierce love, that yeah. So these misconceptions that you talked about, and or that we're touching on now, because some of them also that you just shared really strike a chord with me, is that if I'm not being productive, then I'm not enough. And so
Mm,
also, therefore, I don't deserve, to experience joy in my life. I don't deserve a day off. I don't deserve the ice cream cone.
mm.
Like, these are all many different things. And maybe some of your listeners might resonate with some of these things. And I often ask that. I was for 3.5 Acres Yoga with mental health practitioners who work with children and giving them some trauma informed yoga and mindfulness. And I asked that question, have any of you, just by a raise of hand, had a moment where you didn't believe you were worthy enough to deserve something, or you didn't think that you should take that little 20-minute break for lunch because there was just too much to do and too many people to serve. And almost like 90-95% of the room raised their hands. So this is something where, I want to remind people that I want to remind myself I'm not alone in that feeling, and remind others that they're not alone. And so that is another part and practice I feel personally of self-compassion, is that I'm not alone in this, and my feelings, my experience, my thoughts, how I feel are valid,
Mm.
because this is perhaps, and Kristen Neff does a lot of study on self-compassion and has written a lot of books. Um, and her research has found that self-compassion actually makes us more resilient and more able to survive and thrive. It's actually self-compassionate people, uh, and I don't even remember if I gave you the definition of self-compassion. I can return to that.
Yeah.
um, Self-compassion in action right now, that it's okay. Um, but that they find that those people that practice self-compassion actually are more resilient, because it's more supportive to be that way towards ourself than to berate, blame, and shame, because those guilt, my fault, I'm bad, I'm broken, actually make it more difficult, her studies have found, to survive and thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just wanna, like, point out something that you're pointing to that has been a passion for me, which is when talking to people in service. Because what we find
Mm.
is a lot of burnout and people leave, like, good people leaving fields where they're needed,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
And so if we can see, because they feel like, those people that see all the pain in the world and all there is to do, right? And
Mhm.
we need that energy. Um, but
Yeah.
it's like, if you see it, how can you rest, right? Like, I
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
how can it be right to take a rest when you're seeing all that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they burn out and we lose them 20 years, 30 years earlier than maybe if they had taken a 20-minute rest or a
Yeah.
2-week rest and been able to stay, like, think more long term.
Yeah.
Um, and we need those people, and we need those people to be taking care of themselves.
Yeah, and I love those last words you just said, "Take care of yourself." And we often might say that in passing to each other, "Oh, take care. See you soon. Take care." And it almost feels just like that in passing, and we graze over it, and we don't actually take it to heart. And I say that in my classes often, is that taking care of yourself is not a selfish act. It's actually a selfless act.
Yeah.
And yes, we lose a lot of good people from that burnout, and especially empathic people that carry the weight of the world in their heart and on their shoulders and in their body. That
Yeah.
exhaustion is real. And that is a overlap, with, who am I to have this brief moment of respite, peace, a little nap, a moment of joy with my kids, um, eating the ice cream. Can you tell I like ice cream? But that,
I know, like, I'm
yeah,
craving some now. I'm craving some.
yeah. But that, who am I to deserve this, especially for empathic people? And I'm thinking of, my dad and myself and many others who I know, and where it's like, how can I stop when others are suffering?
Right.
How,
Yeah.
why, and I have these conversations a lot in my world, in my orbit, working with a lot of wellness practitioners and working with a lot of empathic people, and then especially in my work, and working with a lot of women too, who do tend to societally be the symbol of the caregiver.
Yeah.
So again, it's like the self goes to the bottom of the list. And yes, so we're getting to a lot of yeah. these important places that self-compassion can actually help us in doing, which reminds me of the definition that, yeah, self-compassion is really this. Um, well, I'll say one thing that blew my mind about getting to the root and the etymology of the word, which I kind of like looking at vocabulary here and there and getting like, what are the components? It blew me out of the water. So, compassion comes to the English language by way of the Latin root passio, which means to suffer, paired with the Latin prefix cum, C-O-M, cum patio, compassionate, and that means together, that Latin prefix. So compassion actually means to suffer together.
Mm.
Whew. And when I, yeah, take, I invite everybody listening, watching to take a breath with that. Because this is one thing that has helped me and I hope helps others, and a subtle but significant difference between like empathy, sympathy, and compassion
Yeah.
um, is that compassion calls us to action. And I don't want the burnt out people to hear that and be like, oh my God, I have to do again. What do you mean? Like, oh, no, I have to, but reflect it on oneself right there. If that's what you're feeling, oh, I have to do again or be of service again or do more. No, self compassion is if you turn the compassion word into the self compassion, being with oneself. So if you want to place a hand on your heart physically, and if you want to do it right now while you're listening, I invite you to do so because I do it often. And it can be one small practice that you can do with yourself at any given time, anywhere, that can just bring you back to yourself. And it can be just one breath. You know, Jack Cornfield says peace is only ever one breath away, but in that breath space and thinking of that, I call it the sacred space or just like the sacred pause where you get to
Mm.
take a breath. And that's just, it can be just one breath. Maybe you take that breath and it's a conscious breath where you become mindful of your own experience in the moment, your own lived experience, just in that moment. And that breath space can be the space that becomes the difference between the reaction and the response. Thinking of that Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response is that space. And in
Yeah.
self-compassion, we can take that space and remember that I too am here and my experience is valid and real and what I feel is real. So that can be like, I know I'm getting away from the definition, but but that can be some of those woven into daily practice moments. And
Yes.
that's one of the things that I have a personal mission with, um, because we don't ultimately know what life will hold. And we can also have these practices, resources, tools in our back pocket, speaking metaphorically, but also literally, because it might be the gemstone. I mean, I brought one for myself today
Mm.
for this to support myself in this conversation. So it might be that gemstone in the back pocket. It might be the mantra or affirmations. And I really support people in being self compassionate and remembering that nothing is too little or too silly. Because if it
Mm.
supports you in remembering that you are worthy, that you belong, then use it because that's a tool meant for you. And the tools can change whenever you need. But that definition to suffer together and that difference, subtle differences between empathy and compassion, compassion invites us to ask those questions like, how am I? And how can I help? Like,
Mm.
what do I need? How can I help? Um, I often kind of, this is the way I kind of see it, being a New Yorker. I think I can say that now after living here for, I don't know, 20 plus years. But, when I pass, a person that I see experiencing homelessness or whatnot on the subway that looks like they need help, um, empathy is like, I care, I see you. Compassion elicits that call in the heart, but like, I want to help. Like, how can I help? And I can't always help. And I'm discerning in these moments to my own capacity, my own availability, the situation, and this and that, uh, and that I care, and that in whatever way, shape, or form that I might help or that I can help. So self compassion, mirroring that back to oneself. Maybe it's that hand on the heart, and we can even dialogue within ourselves, right? Like, oh, that really hurt. What they said to me, what that person said to me, this is just an example, really hurt my feelings. And so we might take a moment and place hand to the heart or take a breath or just acknowledge how that hurt feels in our body, or simply acknowledge and name that emotion. And then self compassion asks, well, like, what do you need? How can I help?
Mm.
And that can start us on the beginning of a journey, no matter like our upbringing or cultures, which are all things that can get in the way of self compassion. It can just start creating a little bit of space for self. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the difference between, taking that pause and being like, ow, that hurt, and feeling the pain of being rejected or someone just speaking in a way or feeling judged. And the kind of typical reaction of, screw them, or like
Mhm.
defensiveness, like, or I won't let that get to me.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and like what those different reactions elicit. Because obviously, I mean, I don't want to say obviously, but like if it might feel scary for a lot of people to, you know, go into the herd, or they might think that's kind of counterproductive. Why should I say like feel that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that, no, you're touching on a lot of other things, and some blockages from self compassion is that uh, perhaps we've experienced traumas and we've developed innate, embedded beliefs that I am bad. It is my fault. And
Hmm.
there can be a really deep fear, or avoidance to want to go there and to feel.
Yeah.
And that's valid too. Like, I personally believe that is something that if we just stack even more blame or shame, or like, that just makes heavier weight, heavier weight, heavier weight. So if you're afraid to acknowledge how you feel, or to take a look at one yourself, it's just extra weight. If you're like, oh, but I should be able to do that, shouldn't I be able to do this?
Yeah.
um, that's just layering on some extra. And again, it's not to point the finger at oneself or to blame yourself. Sometimes I think the beginning practice is just acknowledgement. So this is why my practicum was named mindfulness as a pathway to self-compassion, because I've had um, a handful of clients over the years ask me, how do I even start that? Where do I begin with self compassion when it was never exemplified? It was never taught to me explicitly. I don't even know what love is. I was not born in a family that gave me love. I don't have an understanding of it, or sometimes even a non belief. Like, I don't believe in love, I don't believe in unconditional love. So I might start by saying, like, I'm here with you, though,
Hmm.
so that the client sees that I'm here and I'm listening and I see you. Uh, and that that just acknowledging one's experience and staying inquisitive and maybe choosing different language. Like instead of love, maybe it's kindness. And I use that word a lot, kindness, because kindness can be like, oh, somebody's belly softens, or like, oh yeah, I can get with that. Because
Yes.
I can be kind to myself and others. But yeah, you're asking some really great questions. Um, and why mindfulness as a pathway to self compassion? Because some people haven't experienced that, or again, known it or don't believe in it. So mindfulness, how I describe it in a nutshell, as I've learned in the MMTCP program that I named earlier, is envisioning it as a two-winged bird, and each wing is an aspect of mindfulness. One wing is awareness, and the other is compassion.
Mm.
So mindfulness as a pathway to self-compassion then becomes the awareness, the acknowledging, naming. Can I just be with it? I don't need to fix it, change it, or try to force it to be anything than what it is, whether it's our thought or how our body is responding, or um, our experience, uh, and and that it's not bad either. Like this is just naming and letting it be there without judgment. So that can ease those edges of blame, shame, the trance of unworthiness right there, being with it, and then bringing in the compassion that says, I see you. I see that this is, this hurts. How can I help? What do you need?
Mm. Yeah, we have to see what's here before we can even think about what we want to change, right? So that
Yeah,
daily, however one can pause during the day or have some kind of trigger that reminds us to just check in with what's going on right now, until it becomes more of a habit,
yeah,
to see. Because often, you know, folks don't even realize that there are choices in the
yeah.
moment.
Yeah. That's one thing I love about the 3.5 acres trauma informed yoga teacher training, and also just the organization and the ethos, is that agency, the reminder you do have choice. And if we are inside the moment of being activated, when we feel like we want to, the flight, fight, freeze, I always have to like slow down my mouth. Like, um, uh, when if we're like red in the face with anger and we want to react and we want to lash back out, we might not see that we have choice in that moment. And so it becomes a practice, that practice of taking that breath, taking that pause where, okay, no, but I actually do have a choice here of how I want to be in this moment. Um, and sometimes we don't have a lot of time, and that's why the the informal practices, the day-to-day practices become really important. But also, and when we do and can create a more intentional set of time, where maybe we're working with a therapist, working with other practitioners of various kinds, or if we're getting on our yoga mat, or we're going to a class, or qigong class, or whatever it is, or our mindful meditations. And there's so many variations of mindful meditation techniques and ways to that we can set aside a more intentional time, where when we are grounded, we might take a deeper look at some of those historical traumas, or past traumas, or current traumas that we might be living in, but that maybe we're outside of that environment, or away from that person or that activation, and we have the internal capacity to take a look at. And that's why I often suggest, working with someone like you or myself or other practitioners or therapists, um, to be able to have that supportive container Um, yeah, because that can be helpful too. Both types of practices.
Yeah. Yeah, there is something about someone, being with, and, sometimes I say to my clients who don't believe, like, you don't have to believe right now. I can hold the hope for you. I can believe for you.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
so you don't have to do that work. Um,
mm.
and because I really do, but it's a different vantage point having seen so many people make that transition into
Yeah,
self-love, and um,
yeah,
that, when I look at a client or a student, I really do see the journey in them that they can't yet see for themselves.
yeah, and I love that you do that, and I would say I do the same. I've never formed it in that way. I think that's really beautiful. The way that I've moved into it is that, like, I'm I'm holding what it's really a belief that I have in them, and my belief that I have for all human beings. And I'm feeling the emotions rise in my body right now, and you'll hear it get caught in the throat because I feel it in my heart, is I truly believe that every person has a place here, that has the right to be here. And not everybody sees that within themselves.
Mm,
And so that's definitely like when I set myself aside and I enter into a session, whether it's my aligned session or Thai body work or yoga or classes, is that is right there in me always. And it's can be a really helpful practice from a practitioner, and I appreciate it to those who support me, um, that they reflect that back, that seeing your journey, or, oh, did you catch that? Like, I'll reflect back to them, did you hear what you just said? And I'm going to repeat it back to you. And sometimes they're like, oh, I said that. I'm like,
yeah.
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 And then I'll ask them, well, how does that feel in your body? And, like, maybe where do you feel that and how does it feel? So that, it's really that's the I had a mental health practitioner just the other day. I loved her word. It was granular. It was granular. It was like such a fine sensation. Um, and that becomes another resource, like an access in the body or heart or breath, that becomes this knowing in the mind, that because I can tell you you belong, and you might say cognitively and think I belong, you might use it as a mantra, but do you feel it? Do you
Yeah.
feel you belong? And
Yeah.
so that translates then back out in how we step back then out into the world. And it's both and it's all interwoven. We can work from the mind into the body, and body into the mind, and heart and spirit.
Hmm. Yeah, I wonder if you would say more on that, because I think that is a challenging
Mm.
thing about affirmations is if you're not really feeling it, believing it,
Yeah,
it's just words, and it
yeah,
could be. I mean, different people feel differently about this. Like, I had Sharon Salzberg on, and we were talking about, the loving kindness, and her
yeah.
thing is like, you don't have to feel it at all. These are gifts. May you be happy, may
Mm,
you be at ease, may you be safe, and you don't have to feel it. Like, it's a blessing that you're giving to yourself and to others, and it will make a difference whether you feel it or not. So that's a take on it, and maybe that's more because those are offerings to others. I mean, you do offer it to yourself at the end.
mhm.
But I find I also get concerned, with affirmations, where if the mind is really against it, or doesn't believe it, that all of that subconscious, like, yeah, right, is also
Mhm.
being amplified. And
Yeah.
so, like, how would you take someone from, like, I belong cognitively to, like, living in an embodied way in their life of knowing they belong?
That's a really great question, and I feel that there's multiple answers. And just to, I love the podcast you had with Sharon, and that definitely we can work in that way. Like we could keep repeating it until maybe we do start to feel it. Um, so yeah, and it is a gift. And I would say also with all of this, start with what's resonant for you. And what I mean by resonant is, does it feel, you know, right in your body, or does it feel good? If you
Yeah.
feel, and this is how, intuition, which is your highest self, true nature, many different names for it, but um, come into play here is, well, does it feel ready for you? Does it feel right to you? So start with what's resonant. So if repeating that mantra, I belong, if you feel a negative reaction from the body, or your eyes roll like mine did,
Mhm.
start in some other place where it feels resonant. So for example, let me think of an example. So, for example, yeah, placing a hand on my heart felt more resonant than just saying to myself, I belong.
Yeah.
So I changed the mantras at sometimes just by saying, I'm a good person. And shout out to my sister, because she and I had conversation. That's where it came from. It's like, and I'm a good person. So
Mhm.
it might be a different mantra that actually feels like it lands in your body. And placing the hand on the heart, how can I support a person moving from the cognitive and a disbelief into a sensation of feeling that they belong and that they are worthy of their own kindness towards themselves and their own care. The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. You yourself, as much as anybody in the world, in the universe, deserve your own kindness towards yourself." So, where, even if it's the smallest thing, could you start today? So I'm presenting that to everybody listening or watching, and even myself when I ask these questions, like, where's a little entry point where I can? So maybe it is taking that 20-minute lunch break that I named earlier. Maybe it's, and do what you can so that it doesn't become, again, another weight of something that is on my list to do. I really support people, like, put it where it's easy.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the beginning where you do brush your teeth, but tomorrow you're going to brush your teeth in this mindful way where you say, as you're brushing your teeth, because the brushing is a somatic action, it's a physical movement that you're doing, it gets you in your body. You are literally taking care of yourself. But also, and doing it in a way where maybe you're adding notice of your breath, or adding a mantra, or putting that post-it note on the mirror, yes, that
Hmm.
says you're worthy, or that says you matter, or that says you're not broken, or whatever. It's not your fault.
Hmm.
So that here you are doing what you do every day, brushing your teeth, but in this mindful way where your awareness is with yourself in that moment for that 1 or 2 minutes of time. And it brings you more into your body. So this is just like one example, and maybe there were multiple examples actually in that share there. But letting it start also small, because I think extra weight of expectation that I should be able to change overnight.
Hmm.
If I have a willingness to want to break this generational trauma or start self compassion today, like, is creates this big expectation. Like, you don't have to start big. You can start where you can. That way, if you say, I'm going to, another example of bringing it into the body, I am going to stretch. And let's say somebody sets out, and this has been some of my clients too, like I'll say, great, that's great, okay. And the client says, I'm going to stretch every day for a half hour. And then I'll ask, like, is that possible? And what is your body saying? And immediately the head nods no. Like every day is not possible. So we start in a way that is possible, so that then, what wasn't possible, and if we don't make it, doesn't become that extra weight of I failed.
Yeah.
Like these are all I feel and have found in my work and with my own self, helpful ways to approach the beginning, to feel it, to feel and act self compassionately towards oneself, and to acknowledge oneself, and then to start those belief systems and way of living in care of yourself and others. And yeah, that's another thing I would roll my eyes out is, taking care of yourself. How do they frame it is like refill your well so that you can be able to fill others, so that, and I used to really not believe that.
Mm. Yeah, I really see it as a way of like buffering against harm that we could do to others in our desire to help. Um,
Mm, yeah.
because I think when that desire to help
Yes.
can get a little bit dangerous, it can actually turn kind of selfish and self involved. Like it's about
Mhm.
me helping you, right?
Yeah.
And right
Yeah.
there, there's kind of like a problem right there. So, I always tell
You
people,
yeah, sorry to
if they
interrupt, go.
can't, no, if it's hard to change for yourself, sometimes an entryway in
Mm,
is recognizing that it really is more of service to others
mm,
when we can soften our approach. And there's something about just that self-compassion that's just for me anyway immediately just softens agenda
yeah.
and that grip on fixing and then moves me into a much more collaborative emergent problem solving space.
Mm. Yeah, and thank you for that. You're reminding me of something my son brought home that I've been using this week in all of my classes and practices and with myself. I've been inviting people to reflect the THINK acronym within themselves, but we can also do it outwards to another person, while simultaneously asking ourselves. So think of the word think and the letters and asking, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it important? Is it necessary? Is it kind?
Oh, I love
So, like, if I want to help somebody, like, I might pause and say, well, like, is this true for me? Is it helpful for me? Because maybe I'm at the end of my rope and I am exhausted and I actually have nothing and I really can't. So it wouldn't be helpful to the person or myself if I'm just pushing through, and then it's, not either authentic or maybe it ends up being not kind. And that can be a self-compassionate act, and also healthful boundaries comes up in my mind with that too. um, but it can also be a self-compassionate action where learning how to say no, or learning how to say, I'll get back to you, or I can't do it now, but can I do it when I have time, or this or that. um, but yeah, and how reflecting that for the other person. So is it true? Is it helpful? Is it important, necessary, kind? Because that reminds me of, I can't remember the gentleman who wrote a book. I think Kellerman is the last name, on gender. And I love that he named instead of the golden rule, he named it the platinum rule, which, golden rule is do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. The platinum rule is do unto others as they would have done unto them, which
Yeah.
means we have to listen. We have to ask. We
Yeah.
have to just be there with them. So, yeah, that's, yeah.
It's so important. I love that, not
Yeah. I do have a real life story of that. I was walking with my son, and I think he's 9 now. And I think at that time he must have been maybe 7 years old. So growing up in New York, he has an understanding and he sees people experiencing homelessness. And we did pass a person in our neighborhood, and this person, it just, I was discerning in my intuition, and in that moment as we passed them and our eyes met, and I asked that question. It felt okay in that moment. I don't always do this, but I asked that person, would you like help? And he looked up at me and said, no, thank you. I was like, okay. And I just nodded, put my hand on my heart, and we kept walking. Um, And that's a moment I'll never forget, because, well, many different things, but also my son and I got to process that afterwards and kind of talk about it in a 7-year-old
Mhm.
language, because, we care. We care. And that person, he did go on to say just really quickly that he didn't want it because, it's not what he needed, and that, he's experienced that in the past. And that was just, yeah, it was a learning moment, a learning
Wow.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. That really highlights that
Yeah.
so clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to just kind of summarize what we've said so far, because there was a lot, or what you've said, and make sure I've gotten it, and we've kind of distilled it down for some of the listeners. So, really, the first step en route to having more self compassion is first this aspect of mindfulness.
Mhm.
And, maybe we've got this backwards because I'm going to have David Treelevin talk about trauma sensitive mindfulness. Well, we'll see which one we air first. But
Nice.
you've briefly covered, you've given us a brief introduction to mindfulness, which is this awareness, right, without
Yeah.
changing or judgment. We'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
So first, we have to kind of know what's going on,
Yeah.
and that's a practice in itself. And
Mhm.
then we can bring to it this self compassion, which could be um, a mantra, an affirmation, a sticky note. It could be a break. So it could take many forms, is what I heard. Like it could take
Yeah.
touch, a hand on the heart. So there are many different ways to practice this. And I think I
Mhm.
heard you say, asking what is needed, what would help,
Yeah.
as a way of inquiry into the self to kind of figure out for yourself what is your entryway in
Mhm.
to practice. And you also said choosing something that's a match and that's easy, maybe coupling it with in a habit that you already have,
Mhm.
um,
A
and not
helpful
taking
habit,
on.
of course.
Yeah, something like brushing your teeth, it's hard to miss that.
Yeah.
You're already doing that, instead of adding more, to do
Mm.
onto the to-do list.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we might invite folks to just be with that and see what comes up as far as like what's the action or wording that might feel right for them as like an entryway
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Definitely. That's a great summary for sure. Um, and it's reminding me of, I don't know how deep we got into it. We did name some things, but there's just a lot of blockages to self compassion. There's a
yeah,
lot of blockages. I sent you the blogs that, since I did the mindfulness as a pathway to self-compassion, why I named it that is because, well, what is it? Or I don't believe in self-compassion, or the misconceptions are there. Mindfulness is a pathway to move us towards it, and then really being able to embody it. Um, but there's, in one of those blogs was, because I made the blogs off of that 4-week series that I did, um, the misconceptions. And there's so many, or sorry, not misconceptions, the blockages. There's so many. It could be the culture we're born into and the messages we receive culturally. It can be societally, what we witnessed growing up and what we see today in society. Um, it can be what we were taught, whether explicitly or not. It can just these blockages of what was exemplified, um, or not exemplified. uh, just so many different things. Yeah, so many different things. It can, I also come from the pathways where, like, the whole Puritanism and the being of service, and you always only give outwards. And so it does seem so selfish to take care of oneself. Um, yeah. So many
Yeah.
different ways of things that can block us from self compassion.
Yeah, and I was thinking, as we sort of near towards the end of our hour, about asking you about some of those, as the podcast is focused on trauma and trauma sensitivity.
Mhm.
And one, image, thought, thing that's coming up for me, is that a lot of folks who have been through trauma, it's easier and safer, especially if they were a child, to blame themselves, um, put
Yeah.
that anger, hate, disappointment onto themselves, than believe that the person who did that to them is bad.
Mhm.
For a child especially, um,
Yeah.
it's not safe. So
Yeah.
I wondered, this is a big a big heavy question, but maybe just some insights on that or other trauma related blockages. And
Mhm.
I know you spoke to it earlier, like accepting what is and not putting in extra, you have to you have to fix this and now you must be self-compassionate. But for people who are at that moment where they see that and they want to change it, any
Mhm.
recommendations about trauma sensitivity, or how to approach this for folks who have been through something like that?
Yeah, I'll try to keep my brain on track with the things that I that I see in
A
it.
lot. Yeah.
Um, but I think this is, and to all listeners and viewers, and in yourself too, Laura, like, notice what comes up when I say self-forgiveness. Self-forgiveness. um,
Here.
that's and just notice without judgment, right? Um, so, if I asked any given person to make a list of all that they've been through, and to look at that list, or to read that list to somebody else and have that person reflect back, my goodness, you've been through so much. You've experienced so much difficulty, pain, struggle, hurt. I mean, so might that be a way to enter into self-compassion, or to begin to see that, you know, that's not your fault. This you could not have prevented that.
Yeah.
You could, as much as you may have wanted to or expected that you were the one that would fix everything. Sometimes I have clients that look back on past moments in their life and they're like, I should have known better, or here's that blame, you know, self blame again, the trance of unworthiness, the self expectation that becomes extra weight. I was leading a workshop in Ohio, and a participant said, I look back And I asked myself, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" Because I used to be a person that it was more easeful for me to offer self-compassion. I was leading a self-compassion workshop. Um, and wow, I just heard and saw her body like droop and get small. And, you know, heard a real like self blaming, like, what happened? What was that moment? And so they're questioning the past that we can't change, of course. We can't go back and change. And what came through in that moment was I responded because she was asking that question, like, what can I do? And I said, well, self compassion, I don't think would ask, what happened? What did you do? Self
Yeah.
compassion meets you right here where you are today, acknowledges what you experienced, and says, how can I help? What do you need from this moment on?
Yeah.
Which can can be very helpful. It can be a huge shift from the blame and shame and etc. It can open a small pathway in which actionable steps or self-realization can begin to happen. Um, so, yeah, what are some of the other things that came to mind? Yeah, I think how does that land so far?
Actually, what came to me is, which is very powerful, was sometimes when we talk about in therapy, one of the things that we talk about is in session, are you in the past, the present, or the future? Like, where is your
Mm,
client mostly in time? And so, what I heard there was a lot of like, let's be in this present moment.
mm,
And that's very powerful. And it took me back to earlier in our conversation when you were talking about that space of choice in the one breath.
mm,
And often there's this idea that we need a lot of time to change. We need a lot of digging to change. We need to understand first why this happened and why I reacted that way, and not dismissing the value in sometimes doing that kind of work. While I also want to acknowledge that some change can be very immediate. Uh,
mhm. Yeah,
yeah, it can be right here in this breath. It doesn't always require understanding
yeah,
um, every detail about what happened. Um,
yeah,
and so there's a power in that, in this moment.
yeah, definitely, definitely, yeah. And I hear that a lot in the wellness community and in yoga classes, and I speak it too, even in mindful meditations, like, let's come back home, come back home to our body, come back home to this moment, or as I say, be here now, or to be present.
Yeah.
Um, and starting right there, just starting right here, right now. Hmm. Yeah. And that also, therefore, can release the expectation of the future, right? That I need
Exactly.
to be a certain way, or can I just be here now?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really beautiful way to kind of tie this in and come to the end of our conversation, because it's very powerful.
Yeah.
And fortune telling
Yeah.
about the future, we don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, it's really right in each next breath that
Hmm.
we have the choice what we do in this breath, and maybe
Yeah.
we avoid that too, because it's like the scary real work of being, um, rather than the imagining that the past could be different or the future might be different.
Or the worry of the
Yeah.
future. I, I, I know it helps my anxiety.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
back to that, is it true?
You're
Helps
right.
with my anxiety. Like, can I just be here now and um, yeah, not projecting, etc. For sure. And that too is an act of self compassion. You know,
Yes. right there.
Yeah. Mhm. Well, this is what's true for
Yes.
me just right now, and this is
Yes.
enough, and I am enough, and this is okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Make it
That's
sound so
beautiful.
simple,
Yes.
right?
Yes, it does. It can I and I to that I say, let it be that simple and let it be that compassionate. And I say that often. Let it be that simple. Let it be that simple. Um, because sometimes, different people and different traumas will be like, it shouldn't be this simple, or I have to work hard at it. I have to dig deeper, deeper. Well, let's take a breath. Let's uh, just connect with a part of our body, that feels a little settled, even if it's just a finger or a hand or our heart or whatever. Like, let it be that simple. Let it be that kind or compassionate. Yeah.
Beautiful. Shauna, I learned so much from talking to you today. Is there anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't touch on that you feel is important?
Mm, I think I think I'll end on a silly note.
Okay.
Um, you know, uh, let it be that simple and silly, or and kind. But I love how Kristen Neff, she kind of creates these three pillars. Kristen Neff is the one who's done research on self compassion, and she calls the three pillars self kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity, versus self judgment, over identification, or isolation. So, thinking of common humanity versus isolation, and I did say this in my workshop, and I got a lot of good smiles and laughs, and it's in my blog, is like everybody poops. Like, everybody goes through things.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through things. So if that helps you to remember that even your, like, favorite celebrity or the person you have, as an ideal representative of compassion and love, like, they it's the, you know, Anodia Judith said, just like you, if you want to place your hand on your heart right now with me, you can. Just like you, I have known pain and suffering. Just like you, I wish to love and be loved. Just like you, I'm doing my best. So that common humanity, to not feel that you're alone, to remember you're not alone, and that you belong in the circle of all things. So,
Yeah. Thank you,
yeah.
Shauna. Thank you really
Thank
for bringing
you.
the universal aspect of,
Yeah.
we're all going through and everyone
Yeah.
is suffering and struggling and yearning and trying in their own ways, and
Mhm.
remembering that is key to the research that Kristen Neff has done, and um, might help us all with our self-compassion. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I hope you
Thank
will
you.
release your course for all of us,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
keep teaching us on this topic. And
Yeah.
for folks who want to learn more about you and find you on the World Wide Web, where can they go?
The World Wide Web is my name, shawnaemerick.com. And I will be releasing in the next week a beloved community. And I have my private practice, and I have my online weekly yoga classes that everybody is invited into. And I will be doing the mindfulness as a pathway to self compassion in the new year. The dates
Good.
aren't set yet. Um, yeah. And inside 3.5 acres yoga in many
Yes.
ways, and continuing education for the trainees. So lots of way. And then, of course, definitely on the socials, on Instagram, I'm at Shauna Shakti, and on Facebook is my name as well. So I would love to hear from your audience, for them to send you or to connect with myself and to hear what did resonate, and maybe like a practice that maybe they already have or that they're going to try out after listening to this podcast. So,
Oh, I love that call to action.
yeah, let
Okay,
us know.
let us
Yeah.
know your self-compassion practice, and I will um, come up with one as well, Shauna. I'm going to be thinking about that for the new
Thanks.
year. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. And thank you all.